spring of 1970, campus communities across this country were characterized by a chorus of protests and demonstrations. The issues were the escalation of the war in Vietnam and the U.S. invasion of Cambodia, the ecology, racism, and repression, as well as the inclusion of experiences of women and minorities in higher education. No institution of higher education was left untouched by confrontations and non-stop change for calls for change. In Mississippi and at Jackson State College, there was the added issue of historical racism, intimidation of students of color, and likewise harassment by white motorists traveling Lynch Street. Lynch Street was a major thoroughfare that divided the campus and linked West Jackson to downtown Jackson. On May 14th and 15th, 1970, Jackson State students were protesting these issues as well as the tragedy of May 4th here at Kent State. According to reports, the riot began around 9:30 p.m. May 14th, when rumors were spread that Fayette, Mississippi Mayor Charles Evers and his wife had been shot and killed. Upon hearing this rumor, a small group of students rioted. That night, several white motorists called the Jackson Police Department to complain that blacks were throwing rocks at them as they passed through campus via Lynch Street. The rock throwing was later attributed to a group of non-students. The rioting students set several fires and overturned a dump truck that had been left on campus overnight at a construction site. Jackson firefighters who were dispatched to the blaze met a hostile crowd that harangued them as they worked to contain the fire. Fearing for their safety, the firemen requested police backup. The police blocked off Lynch Street and cordoned off a 30-block area around the campus. National Guardsmen, still on alert from rioting the previous night, massed on the west end of Lynch Street. The Guardsmen, mounted on armored personnel carriers, had been issued weapons but no ammunition. 75 city policemen and state police officers armed with carbines, submachine guns, shotguns, service revolvers, and some personal weapons responded to the call. Their combined armed presence on the Lynch Street side of Stewart Hall, a men's dormitory, staved off the crowd long enough for the firemen to extinguish the blaze and leave. After the firemen left, the police and state troopers marched along Lynch Street toward Alexander Hall, a women's dormitory, with weapons at the ready. Falling back before the approaching officers, the students congregated in a thick knot in front of the dormitory. At this point, the crowd numbered 75 to 100. Several students allegedly shouted obscene catcalls, while others chanted and tossed bricks at the officers who had closed to within 100 feet of the group. The officers deployed into a line facing the students. Someone in the crowd either threw or dropped a bottle, which shattered on the asphalt with a loud pop. At the same time, an officer fell, struck by a piece of thrown debris. Accounts disagree as to what happened next. Some students said the police advanced in a line, warned them, and then opened fire. Others said the police abruptly opened fire on the crowd and the dormitory. Other witnesses reported that the students were under the control of a campus security officer when the police opened fire. Police claimed they spotted a powder flare in a stairwell window and opened fire on the dorm only in self-defense. Whatever actually occurred, the police opened fire and continued firing for 30 seconds. The students scattered, some running for the trees in front of the library, but most scrambling for the Alexander Hall West End door. When the order to cease fire was given and the gunfire ceased, Philip Lafayette Gibbs, 21, a junior pre-law major and father of an 18-month-old son, lay dead 50 feet east of the west wing door of Alexander Hall. 2 buckshot pellets had punched into his head, while a third entered just beneath his left eye, and a fourth just under his left armpit. Across the street, behind the line of police and highway patrolmen, James Earl Green, 17, was sprawled dead in front of B.F. Roberts Dining Hall. Green, a senior at Jim Hill High School in Jackson, was walking home from work at a local grocery store when he stopped to watch the action. He was standing in front of the dining hall when a single buckshot blast slammed into the right side of his chest. 12 other Jackson State students were struck by gunfire, including at least one who was sitting in the dormitory lobby at the time of the shooting. Several students required treatment for hysteria and injuries from shattered glass. Injured and carried to University Hospital for treatment were Funzie Coleman, Red Wilson Jr., Leroy Kenter, Vernon Weekly, Gloria Mayhorn, Pat Sanders, Willie Woodard, Andrea Reese, Stella Spinks, Clemmy Johnson, Tuane Davis, and Lundsey Thompson. The 5-story dormitory was riddled by gunfire. FBI investigators estimated that more than 460 rounds struck the building, shattering every window facing the street on each floor. Investigators counted at least 160 bullet holes in the outer walls of the stairwell alone, bullet holes that can still be seen today. The injured students, many of whom lay bleeding on the ground outside the dormitory, were transported to University Hospital within 20 minutes of the shooting. But the ambulances were not called until after the officers picked up their shell casings. The police and state troopers left the campus shortly after the shooting and were replaced by National Guardsmen. After the incident, Jackson authorities denied that city police took part in the fusillade. That the highway patrolman fired was never an issue. On June 13, 1970, then-President Richard Nixon established the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. At the Jackson hearings, the administration, faculty, staff, and students testified, but there was no conviction and no arrest. In subsequent action, the Jackson City Council voted to close Lynch Street to through traffic. Shortly after the closing, a plaza was constructed between Stewart Hall and Alexander Hall. The Gibbs Green Plaza is a favorite gathering spot for students and the site of many outdoor programs and activities. Across the plaza, directly in front of Alexander Hall, is the Gibbs Green Monument, a permanent memorial to the slain students and a tangible reminder to all students that the Jackson State tragedy must never happen again.